Hello everyone, it's Ren speaking. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to have fun trying to figure out whether INTPs, INTJs, or INFJs are the better philosophers. And just as an announcement, you can already anticipate that I'm going to say something along the lines of it depends on the perspective you take. There's varieties and variations. But since I committed to making this video and I sold that idea, I will venture to give my personal opinion by making a choice among these three. Now, before that, remember that I have written a book specifically on the INFJ type with also a useful insight into the INTJ personality. This book is about the existential constitution of the INFJ consciousness. It's called The Ecstatic Soul, Deepest Investigation of the Type. You'll find online if you already have good knowledge, but you want to go further to peel off the layers of the fascinating INFJ type. This is the book to get. All links below in the description box to all the Amazon websites, less than $10, ebook and paperback format. If you have any questions, you can shoot and I will get back to you. So, which of these three types is on average the better philosopher? I suppose I should begin by explaining why I selected those three types and not other ones. So I decided to go for this top three because it seems to me that these three types are the ones that are traditionally most interested and most attracted to philosophy. So in the first place, you could say sensors versus intuitives. Sensors a little bit less likely to be attracted to philosophy because philosophy is abstract and often without a direct connection to experienced reality. Remember, doesn't mean that no sensor has an interest in philosophy. There are very good philosophical sensors. Thomas Hobbes is an example. For example, of Diogenes, the Cynic, is another example. And you have examples in more recent philosophy. For example, Saul Kripke, the logician, often seen to be an ISTJ. So you have a lot of sensors, but on average, intuitives more likely to be philosophically minded, interested in philosophical pursuits. Within intuitives, I've chosen these three because I think ENFJs, not a lot of ENFJ philosophers. ENTJs, there's a very famous INTJ philosopher, namely Aristotle, but apart from him, not a lot of examples. INFPs tend to be a little bit more drawn to what's creative rather than philosophical. Of course, there are exceptions, Kierkegaard and so on, Augustine. And ENTPs and ENFPs, I think that you could make a case for ENTPs and ENFPs being influential types on philosophy today. But more on the side of like literary theory and literary criticism. Some of their work is yet to be taken completely seriously by the philosophical discipline. So here you could talk about Judith Butler, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and so on. So ENTPs and ENFPs could be included at some point in the future. But I think that the INTP, INFJ, and INTJ are, if you look at the philosophers that have dominated the Western line of, the Western direction of thought since the pre-Socratics, since, the time of antiquity. These are the three types that occur the most. And if you also take into account that they're not on the same level of commonness. So, for example, INFJs are quite a bit less common than INTJs and INTPs. This explains why there are more INTPs and INTJs than INFJs that are famous and influential. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're more philosophically minded. So just to cement my claim, among INTPs, you have to think of Parmenides, pre-Socratic. You can think of Descartes, right, founder of modern philosophy. You can think of Immanuel Kant, and most of the logicians, Kurt Gödel, and many other, Alan Turing, philosophers or thinkers of the 20th century, where our INTP, John Searle is another example. INTJs, you have Heraclitus, pre-Socratics, and then moving on from that, you have Martin Luther, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche. So there's a lot of names as well. And for INFJs, obviously Plato, Plotinus, you have Schopenhauer, you have Wittgenstein, so some pretty huge names there. So on paper, they all have pretty good street cred. So how to tell which one is the best, which one is the best philosopher? So I have to look a little bit further into what distinguishes these types and their approach to philosophy, as suggested by their cognitive makeup. So perhaps start with INTPs, because I think on the surface, INTPs are, at least from an academic perspective, the philosophers par excellence, made to be philosophers if they don't go for science. I have a bit of a sore throat, so this coffee is actually a lot of relief. INTPs are TI dominance, NE auxiliary, SI tertiary. Now, what does that mean concretely? It means that TI is interested in securing consistency, coherence, and logically sound and well-articulated thought. NE is interested in exploring new possibilities, and SI is interested in establishing frameworks that can last over time. So you have in this cocktail the rigorousness of the philosopher, the TI, the imaginativeness and the innovative frame of mind of the philosopher, dictated by NE, and that's my book gone, but you've already seen that, so that's fine. And you have with SI the interest that the philosopher has in building systems that can endure over time, and also from a pure technical viewpoint, from the viewpoint of the ability of the INTP, it's also the ability to summon a lot of knowledge that's already established in their minds to deploy in what's new. So really, you have a very powerful cocktail here. What is possibly missing, or at least not present as strongly as in the case of an INTJ, for example, who will be our second type to discuss, is that because the INTP doesn't have NI dominance, the INTP might be a little bit less likely to be a revolutionary thinker. Revolutionary thinker is a thinker who thinks beyond current norms of doing either science or thinking, or philosophical thinking or sociological thinking. You have a set of norms, you have a set of implicit or explicit rules and expectations and theorems that dictate, and research interests that dictate what the current sort of mood of the research domain is. INTPs are very good at parsing that with TI and finding things that jump out at them through NE, but because they're non-intuitive dominance and they're not NI dominance, they're TI, so they're oriented primarily to what's there and that they can parse that. Now, if there are anomalies, they will pick them out and focus their intuition on that, and then may follow something quite revolutionary. So you have Kant, you have Descartes, you have Einstein. So, there's plenty of evidence that INTPs can be revolutionary. But I think intrinsically speaking, NI is a bit more revolutionary because it is not based on being attuned to what's currently being done, because NI collects information unconsciously and comes up with its own very, very subjective intuitions. It's different from the subjective thinking of INTPs, because subjective thinking of INTPs means that yes, the INTP has a way of parsing information subjectively, but the information that eventually comes out has to follow intersubjective, in fact objective, rules of soundness and consistency and coherence. These rules are not subjective, so they transcend the subjectivity of the introverted thinking in this case. It's not so much the case with an INTJ, because an INTJ, first of all, they don't have much in the way of TI, but they have NITE and FI. So here I think that FI is useful for the revolutionary thinker, because it just means that the revolutionary thinker will not be influenced by FE, like the INTP is wishing to, in some sense, be sanctioned by his community in his research. Again, that could lead to a little bit less revolutionary radicalness and a bit more conservativeness than the case of an NI dominant who's an FI tertiary, where a certain sense of absence of care about what the community thinks, and the directness of a highly subjective set of intuitions, not vetted by TI, can really lead you along paths that create a Hegel, create a Marx, create a Nietzsche, and unbelievably idiosyncratic thinkers who were doing things that nobody was doing before them. Whereas in an INTP, often what you find is that they revolutionize something on the basis of what had been done before, but they find a way of surpassing it. Whereas anti-dominant, sometimes they seem just to come up with something out of nowhere. Nietzsche, Hegel, Marx, even Heraclitus, if you know a little bit. But also among INFJs, Plato and and Schopenhauer and Wittgenstein. But just to finish with INTJs, because they have auxiliary TE, they're very good at making what they come up with consistent with the way the world is in some way, to find an account of how what they come up with, which is highly subjective, can be vetted by the world itself through the use of extroverted thinking. Which is why you could have something as kind of crazy as Marxism in the sense of dialectical materialism, historical materialism, and yes, in some way Marx delineates how it can be implemented. Now you could debate whether that was a good thing or not, but nevertheless he has been very influential. And finally, INFJs. INFJs are anti-dominant. They're FE auxiliary, TI tertiary. And here's my claim. I claim that the best philosopher, in principle, on the basis of this purely abstract kind of interaction between characteristics of types and philosophy, and what philosophy is and what good philosophy is, sound, logically well articulated, original, revolutionary, and so on. I think that's the ideal philosopher is an NITI INFJ, and is more specifically a highly gifted, extremely gifted NITI INFJ. So I'm thinking, I think the perfect examples here are Plato and Wittgenstein. They're the two, probably the most important philosopher of the ancient Greek era, and the most important philosopher of the contemporary or the modern 20th century era, because they combined the innovative radicalness and revolutionary tendencies of subjective intuition with an ability to interact with others, influence others through FE, because that's always a very important part of it. INFJs depend on exchanging with others to refine their intuitions, but also if you have a very gifted NITI INFJ, what you will get is a TI like Wittgenstein's, for example, or like Schopenhauer's, that ensures a level of rigor and articulate expression that nearly rivals that of the INTP. But in addition to that, there is the innovativeness, the revolutionary tendencies of introverted intuition to bring thought along new directions. If that's well articulated, and if that's made compelling to high T users, that can lead to the revolutions that Plato, Wittgenstein, and maybe to an extent Schopenhauer have led. People were mystified by their intuitions, but they didn't stop at thinking, that guy has a lot of intuitions and they're fascinating, but I can't take him seriously as a thinker. If you have well-developed TI, you can make yourself taken seriously as a thinker, in addition to being a fascinating purveyor of aphorisms and metaphors. And this is my choice, but I'd like to know what you think in the comments. And if you think I'm biased, feel free to let me know. That's completely fine. I try not to be, and I try to make an argument. But I would love to know what you think. So leave a comment, consider giving me a like and subscribing, and I will see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.